Good morning, Mick. Welcome to today's board gaming breakfast. For those of you who are new to the channel, board gaming breakfast is a live stream I like to do every weekday around 8 a.m. Eastern time, where I go live and talk about a game that's been on my mind, explain some of the mechanics that I find to be very unique or make the game fun, or the reasons that it gets stuck into my head. We'll then move into a quick brainstorming exercise of taking the game of the day and adding a random board game mechanic to it. We have a wheel of about 50 different game mechanics that will spin, and we'll have 5 minutes to try to ideate how we put that mechanic into the game of the day. And then we'll wrap up breakfast with designing a game in under 5 minutes from a randomly generated prompt. I'll explain at the beginning of each of those segments how those work. But thank you for pulling up a seat at the table, and let's have some breakfast. One sec. Hello? Yeah, that's okay. Okay, but sorry about that. All right, so let's start off with today's game of the day. Today's game of the day is Northgard Uncharted Lands by, I believe, Games. The designer is Adrian Deneau, and this was one of the first Kickstarters that I ever backed. So Northgard Uncharted Lands, for those of you who aren't familiar, is a deck building area control game where you're playing over the course of 7 rounds or 10 rounds in the extended game, where you're competing to have the most victory points. And so at the end of the 7th round, you will count up score, and whoever has the most points wins. It also has a hidden win automatically mechanic, or not so much hidden, but it's got a win automatically mechanic where if you are able to control 3 areas that are closed off with big buildings, you can win immediately. And so the 2 mechanics that I want to talk about today are the deck building element or the hand management element of the game, as well as the exploration of the game. It's pitched as a 4X style game, and for those of you who aren't aware of what that is, it is where you are exploring, exploiting, expanding, and exterminating, I believe. It's a big area control style game. And so there are 2 elements that I'd like to talk about today. So everyone's going to start with the same 5-card deck along with their unique leader in the game. And so I will pull out what those leaderboards look like if you have the Primo edition. So each person will get their deck of 5 as well as a clan and little player boards. So from a quality standpoint, the modular player boards are pretty cool of how you can combine your different colors. The colors aren't fixed into the clan types, and so you'll get a little asymmetrical power as well as a mini upgrade tech tree that you can build into your deck. But for the most part, everyone's starting with the same 5 cards plus a 6th unique one to make them a little asymmetrical. And at the beginning of each round, you'll draw up to 4. And these are the number of actions you'll be able to take in the round. And one of the cool parts about it is that most deck builders I've played, you lose the cards in your hand at the end of the round. Not so much for Northgard. So at the end of the round, you'll draw 4 cards, but you get to keep anything in your hand. So the ability to, if there is a round that you don't think you'll need to take many actions, you can stockpile those actions for the end of the game or the next round to manipulate the board state to give yourself more of a tactical advantage, which I think is such a cool, unique little twist to the standard deck builder. And how you end up building your deck is at the end of each round, you will have the option to claim one of the asymmetrical cards laid out in the market row for you to purchase. And how this isn't super unique to Northgard, but the first person to pass in the round gets first pick in the asymmetrical cards that you'll slowly be using to upgrade your deck throughout the game. And since there's only 7 rounds, and at the end of the 7th round, the new card you'd select would not go into your deck, there's really only 6 cards that you'll be gaining throughout the game, and one of those you might only be able to use, like, not at all, if once, depending on how your draw works. And so I think that's such an interesting way to strategize around picking the cards that you think you can build a strategy around. I'll clean up that sentence. I think the fact that you're only getting 6 cards in the game makes it such a tight design or creative space for strategy that you have to really think through which cards you want to pick and build around. So that is the interesting flair of it's not a typical deck builder where you're cycling through your deck like a Clank or even Moonrakers, Dune, and Arnak all have a deck building mechanic in them that you'll guarantee to see the card at least once or twice. It's interesting how some cards you might not actually play in this game that you draft, even though you're only going to have up to maybe 12 cards in the course of the game. So I think that decision space being that tight makes it very interesting to try and strategize around. The second mechanic I'd like to talk about is the exploration mechanic in the game. And so the feast card, if you see this symbol up here, whenever you play one of those symbols, you get to explore a unclosed off land that you're currently in. And so the game board is made up of these modular tiles. And as you can see, they have little borders on them that when you put one and one together, it creates the areas that you're looking to control and hold throughout the game. And so if I had some of my characters on this one and I played an Explorer, I would draw the top tile from the tile deck and be able to orient it in any way that I would like next to this open space that I'm exploring on. And the only criteria you have to follow here is that you can't make it so that an area that you're in is closed into an area that someone else is in. So for this example, if we had an opponent in this top area here, we wouldn't be able to orient this tile like that because we've now created a large space that we're both in. And it's a subtle design element, but I think that is very unique in the unknown of what you're going to explore into, but also having some of that agency to be able to manipulate the map to better position yourself through the game. So you have different borders that cost different amounts of movement to get through. And so this border in the yellow right here symbolizes a mountain. And so if I drew this and we were on this tile here and say there was an opponent up in that space there, I might be inclined to actually put this up here to close off to make that border a lot harder for my opponents to come invade my land in. And so the small agency of the rotation of how you get to select what direction you want the new tile played into gives you that slight bit of control in the randomness and how the board develops that feels very tactical in the moment and is probably by far my favorite mechanic in Northgard Uncharted Lands. So that in closing is the game that I'm bringing to today's breakfast. It is Northgard Uncharted Lands, and it has a deck building area control mechanics that are the two main uh, highlights of what you're doing in this game, but the agency of building out the map, I think, is the coolest design space personally in the game. Whenever I play Northgard, I like to be able to explore as much as possible because I like to dictate the map that we're playing on. So now we'll move into the spinning the wheel section of today's breakfast. And so what we'll do here is we'll spin our wheel of mechanics, and whatever it lands on, we'll have to quickly brainstorm how to fit into Northgard. So I cut, you choose is the mechanic that we landed on. So let me just write that where everyone can see. So we got I cut, you choose is the mechanic that we'll have to design into Northgard Uncharted lands. And so what we do here is we'll pull up the timer. So we have 5 minutes to ideate how we might be able to fit this mechanic into Northgard. So we're going to start the timer and see where this design prompt takes us. So I cut, you choose is a mechanic that the premise around it is that one player has all of the information and they're choosing how to deviate or distribute the all of one resource or the direction. Like they're giving the decision of who gets what to the opponent, but they get to choose what resources are on what side. So a typical I cut, you choose would look like if you have 3 apples, 2 grapes, and 3 bananas, or 4 bananas. The person that draws all of the fruits gets to say, okay, well, if we have to divvy them up into 3 sections, we'll put 2 apples here and a banana. We'll put 3 bananas here, and we'll put both the last apple and the 2 grapes. So they'll choose the 3 sections of how the fruits are divided, and the other players get to select which grouping they want from the options available. And so with that understanding, with adding I cut, you choose into Northgard, I would probably start by there's 2 thoughts that I have of how we could quickly insert this mechanic into Northgard. The first being that when you're exploring, instead of drawing 1 tile, you would draw the number of tiles of the number of players playing plus 1. So for a 3-player game, we would draw 4 tiles, and the opponents in the game would get to remove which tiles they don't want the player to explore in, and the last remaining tile, or the last 2 remaining tiles, the player gets to choose which is the final one that they would like to place. That would be giving agency to all players in the game, but would sort of follow the criteria of the I cut, you choose, where if we're playing the 3-player game, say player 1 doesn't want, or the player to the left of whoever the active player is doesn't want them to select this one because it is giving them more strength on one border, and the second player in the game doesn't want this one. They're leaving the decision of which tile the active player gets to choose as the remaining 2 there. That's one way we could put I cut, you choose into this game. The second idea that I was thinking was doing it something around the cards that you have in the market to select from at the end of each round, having some agency there for players, and that would be the space that I would focus on trying to do our second option of I cut, you choose. How would we go about doing that? So potentially the order matters of, say there are, again with a 3-player game, there would be 6 cards laid out for each round, and so the person who passes last, so we got the 6 cards here as the market for selecting for the end of the round. The first person to pass gets to choose first, the second person to pass gets to choose second, and then the third person who passes gets the ability to decide which cards in the market are paired off with each other. And so if they decided to turn this into this is the market, and they paired them off so that that turns into 3 piles of 2 cards. The player who passed first gets the selection of the 3 way options of how player 3 cut it, and then player 2 would, so say player 1 takes this one, player 2 would then have the option to select the 2 remaining piles of how they've sectioned the cards off. So checking the time, perfect timing, the timer has just gone off. So to recap, our goal for this brainstorm was to figure out how we would introduce an I cut you choose mechanic into Northgard, and in the 5-minute design window, we came up with 2 options of how we might be able to introduce this mechanic. So the first has to do with exploration. When somebody explores, you draw the number of tiles of the amount of people playing plus 1. So in our example, it was a 3-player game, 4 tiles would be drawn. Then the 2 players that are not the active players would remove tiles that they don't want placed into the map, and the remaining 2 tiles would be the options for the explorer to choose and place in, is one way we would introduce I cut you choose, not as clean in the traditional sense, but gives the same similar agency to an I cut you choose mechanic. The second option has to do with the cards that you'll get at the end of the round, where it's the buying phase of the game. So instead of giving the agency of when you pass getting to select first, you won't select the cards right away. The person who passes last gets to take the 6 options that are available and pair them off to 2 and 2. And the player who passed first would then get to select from those 3 piles. Are the 2 creative ways that we brainstormed how to introduce I cut you choose into Northgard Uncharted lands. So how I would go about getting this to the table to test would be, there isn't much in terms of material that I would then have to create. I would probably just add in a 1-line rule for either option that we go with. For option 1, I would state that anytime you draw a tile, draw number of players plus 1, and the players would choose which ones to discard in turn order, left to the active player and so on. I'd write it out to be a little more elegant than that. And for option 2, I would do the same sort of thing. At the start of each round, I would rewrite out the round sequence of it shows on the player board here. So start of the year, draw 4 cards and reveal development cards. So I'd just say reveal 6 development cards, or number of players times 2. And when you pass and pick a development card, I would say pass and wait, and then between phases 2 and 3, I would write out what the players are doing for that phase. So that would probably be 10 minutes of writing out those note cards and printing them, or just writing them by hand if I could keep my handwriting clean enough. And the next time we pulled out Northgard to play as a group, I would get consent from all of the other players playing, saying, hey, I have 2 concepts that I wanted to try and house rule to see what the experience feels like, and if the group is willing, I would explain to them the 2 options of the I cut you choose for development or I cut you choose for the market, and see which one they pick and try with that. And so that is how I would take this concept and get it from paper to testing in reality. So with that, we will transition into the last segment of today's breakfast, is the generating a new game in 5 minutes. So for those of you who aren't familiar with this site, it's called letsmakeagame.net, and it is a randomly generated prompt for designing a game around. So what's going to be generated for us is a genre, rule, setting, and theme as the prompt for us to follow. And same as the previous section, we are going to give ourselves a 5-minute timer to see where this brainstorming gets. So without further ado, I'm going to click the generate button. And so we got the genre is procedurally generated sports simulation. The rule is no enemies. The setting is distant future, and the theme is war. I'm going to try and not design around the war theme, so I'm going to click the button again. I apologize if this prompted any good ideas for others. I'd love to hear what you come up with in the comments below, but it is not a theme I'm going to design around today. So the genre is point and click. The rule, we got World War. So we got the genre is racing, like Quap-like being, I don't know if anyone's ever played Quap, but it is a game where you only have the QWOMP to control a person's legs. We'll probably just design around a racing game today. The rule is unconventional movement. The setting is superhero, and the theme is horror. That seems like a great space for us to design. So I'm going to pull up a new tab on our tablet, and I'm going to reset the 5-minute timer, and we are off. So we got unconventional movement. I would say that this is going to be a mechanics first game, and what would happen is, so a racing style with unconventional movement. So my first thought is that we have a racing board, and you're supposed to save the character over here, and we all are superheroes at the starting line, and we got our superheroes trying to save the hostage in some sort of horror setting, and the sections would be sectioned off here of it's a race to the end. And how we determine how the race goes is there would be a deconstructed deck row. Deconstructed deck row. And what I mean by that is that you would have X number of spots for the number of people playing. So we'll say this is a 2-player game, 3-player game, 4-player game. And what you're doing is selecting your 6 cards to play for the round. So it would be a hidden placement style game, I think, where you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 slots that you can play cards into, and they would be played in turn order, where, say, player 1 wants to place a card here, player 2 then would get to go and place a card here, and each of these sections down here would have to have 3 more slots. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And so cards are played out in a round based on whoever is furthest back in the race gets to play their first card. And so say something ends up like this, where those are the cards that are played. So then you would stack the deck so that they come out in that order, or you wouldn't even have to stack the deck. You could just flip them from left to right, and that would dictate the actions that are taken this turn. And so it potentially be in a game, it'd be a programming style race game, but you are all programming to the same line. And how the cards might look is you would have maybe some sort of linking bonus. This is definitely heavily inspired by the new Tapestry expansion, where there'd be some sort of, I guess it's also similar to, I guess it wouldn't be like the Starship game, because you don't have as much agency there, but there'd be little bonuses that get triggered when cards are linked, depending on where they are in slot order. Oop, did not mean to bump that. And there would be some sort of, how would we, there'd be some sort of movement. And maybe there's a mini-game board that you're positioning around that we'd have to ideate there, but I can't even read my handwriting. But there'd be some sort of movement. We'll just say it's numbers right now. And there'd be some sort of action on the cards. And so we would have to come up with the market row that these cards would be out on, that you'd be able to select for the hand management of the game, and maybe that within that market row this is probably a cleaner version of what the game board would look like. This would be grid-like, and that scared me. So the timer's gone off, so I'll quickly try to summarize where we got in this brainstorming process. I apologize for today's breakfast. I was not able to articulate my thoughts as clearly, but we have a race game that has unconventional movement, and it's a superhero horror theme. And so we kind of ignored the horror aspect of it, but you're trying to save this person at the end, kind of like a Mario Luigi style game where you're trying to save Peach at the end of the path, and your goal is to make it up these different spots on the racing track, and it's a race to save Peach. And so what we've come up with so far is that there are these multi-purpose cards that maybe are positioned two ways. So there's a movement style, so we have movement, and then we have an action, and then there's little bonuses to that we'd figure out later on in the design space. But what you're doing is you're committing these action cards to this programmed row, and maybe you can rotate them to either take the movement or the action. And you have this board here that you're manipulating your player piece on with the movements. And so it's potentially fighting for a objective spot to whoever can hold that spot or is closest to that spot at the end of the round gets to move up on the racetrack, and the first to do that 5 times saves Princess Peach and they win, or gets to be the crowning superhero. And so the way that's done is you're programming cards out to this communal deconstructed deck row, and would trigger the movements in sequence, and that is as far as we got. So to be honest, we probably need to spend a little more of a longer brainstorming time to flesh out what the card looks like. So we'd have a movement on one side, figure out what some of those actions are on the other side. Potentially we could color code the different quadrants of this board, where the action gets to be taken if you're on a specific color. And so you'd all start with the same 3 cards, and as the game progresses, there'll be more cards available for in the market row, and say whoever takes the first placement in the like the earlier you place a card in this programming row is the earlier you get to select a card at the end of the round, for similar to Northgard, selecting your card to upgrade this hand style deck and choosing potentially once you're at 5 cards, you have to then get rid of a card secretly. And so there's this hidden style of movement where you're trying to that would be the biggest thing that we'd have to figure out. And so figuring out how we translate this programming into movement for the end of the round is what I would need to flesh out before getting this game to the table. But where I would start is I would try to use standard 52 playing card, and I would assign different actions to the suits potentially. So you have to come up with 4 different colors, and these would be all linked to different suits. So depending on where you are on the board is when you could play the action, and the number associated to the card allows you to move that number of spaces, and if you're looking to move someone else, it would cost 2 movement points. So I would essentially start with that. I would get the deck of 52, shuffle them out. So I guess there would be slightly different actions. Maybe everyone gets a 1 through 3. Oh, that unconventional movement. So potentially you if you can push someone else into this spot here, that would allow you to move up and save the Peach. I guess we'll continue with the Mario theme. So that is a bunch of rambling. So I'll try and tie it up in a nice, pretty package to end us off with. So our prompt for the day was a racing game with unconventional movement. That the theme of it is superhero and horror. And so everyone has the same 3 cards at the start of the game that have a movement and an action associated to them, which for testing the action you'd have to be within the same row or column as the suit, and you would program 3 of your cards to the board for the round, and you would then take the actions on the main board. Anytime that you push someone else onto the randomly generated pit for the game would allow you to move up closer to the end of the racing track and um, win the game. And I would test that core system out, probably with somebody that doesn't need to play a polished game. I might volunteer my fiance Michaela to test with me, or potentially one of my other designer friends, and that's how I'd start the game to see if that communal programming track is even fun, and so that or this kind of objective pushing would be fun. I'd probably ignore the bonus links for now, and that would be the initial jumping off point where I would go to see if this game that we brainstormed was even fun to begin with and worth continuing to push in the development process. So we did run a little long today, so I apologize for that, but I appreciate everyone who's watching currently, and I appreciate those who are jumping in to watch the recap of the live stream later. If you ever want to be part of one of these, feel free to shoot me an email and we can coordinate a time that we can go live together and potentially brainstorm together. If you have any thoughts on Northgard and want to communicate what your favorite mechanic was of Northgard, I'd be happy to continue that conversation either in our Discord or on this YouTube video. But with that, I'll let everyone go, and I appreciate everyone taking the time to listen to the concepts that we brainstormed today. So with that, I'm going to sign off. Thank you, everyone.